Code software. Are you famous now? And he said, I don't know. How many listeners do you have, Tim?
Stay away from me.
Welcome to the To Code podcast. That's not what it's called.
The To Code Software Podcast, episode 6.
Thank you, Tim. I'm Tim Purdom.
And I'm Tim J.
And today we're going to talk about developer burnout and what burnout looks like to you, how to deal with it, and how to avoid it. Tim and I have been talking about burnout as it comes up during work, different stressors. And I think first what we need to talk about is how do we define burnout? What does it look like to us? So, Tim, why don't you start?
Oh, it's a topic so very near and dear to my heart. Well, burnout has many different forms and it manifests in many different ways, even for myself. And it took me a long time before I could recognize it. And I say this as an old crotchety man who yells at the kids on my lawn.
Right.
When I was young, and this probably is more true than not for most people, when you're in your 20s, you can kind of burn the candle a bit brighter. Sure. I grew up in Wisconsin, which is a drinking state, and there was a lot of my 20s where it was just like, let's go to the bar and get really drunk, every weekend for like 2 years. And Thankfully, I'm not an alcoholic or anything, but I could do that. You could drink all night, go to bed at like 2 a.m, wake up at 6, go into work, and you'd be fine. And I never really burned out in my 20s. I never really ever felt like I got to that position. And then it was maybe late 20s, but probably early 30s was when I was like, oh, wow, I can't do this anymore. Like I can't push myself on that level. And I realized it through just physical exercise or even just, oh yeah, I used to be able to pull an all-nighter all the time, no problems. And now I'm like, man, the last time I stayed up till midnight, the next day I was a zombie. I couldn't function. I had to drink 30 cups of coffee. And I think it's why burnout comes in so many different forms is because for a lot of people, it doesn't manifest until a little bit later. And it kind of depends on what you were kind of pushing too hard.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I never went through that heavy partying phase, but it definitely grows on you as you get older. I think that's a commonality of burnout is that the older you get, the more things can be stressors on you. I think you have more responsibilities, you have more expectations on yourself as well as from other people.
Absolutely.
Just hold yourself
hit
to
the
a
nail
higher
on the
standard.
head. Well, you get a car payment, you got a house payment, you got insurance, when you start, those things mean a lot more. It puts more pressure on the job.
Right.
When you're just kind of working and it's really only you that you're taking care of and you can be a little more fast and loose with your money, your job doesn't cause as much stress because there's always that thought of, I can get another one. When you're a bit older and the prospect of, I can get another one isn't quite as easy to swallow.
No, it's much more intimidating when, what happens if I don't get another one? What happens if I have to make ends meet for months or a year or something without a job?
That can segue actually directly into an example of burnout that's a weird one that you just described for me. Up until I was employed by the company we work for, I was unemployed, quote unquote, because my side business has always been running, just not making nearly enough money.
Right.
I was basically unemployed for about 10 months, where the amount of money that I had coming in from my side business was at an uncomfortably low level. Right. And I was looking for work that entire time. And I had all the free time, I could just sit and play video games if I wanted to or burn through Netflix episodes. But fundamentally, that caused burnout because there was this constant pressure to find a job. And then this kind of unlimited free time that turns into this, if I'm not spending 100% of my time looking for a job, I feel guilty. But then I have all this free time. And that led to this weird sort of burnout where I realized I needed a different structure in my life. I was so used to some sort of structure coming from like an active job that I needed to replace that with something. And in that case, I started making giant chore lists for myself. And I got back on the track of running and did a bunch of things to kind of restructure. And well, that kind of talks about how I coped with that particular burnout, was that I invented a structure for myself. Just laying around wasn't giving me what I needed. But if I knew, okay, I need to spend an hour doing some stuff around the house, I need to go and do the mowing every Sunday, I need to do this sort of shopping here, that provided something that made me feel like I was accomplishing something. And then it just made that burnout go away.
Yeah, I think you can totally see how some people get into a spiral of unemployment and depression because of exactly what you're describing, where it's very stressful to not have a job, and that can just push you even more to be unable. Like some people just can't make that switch, like you said you made, where, okay, now I'm going to discipline myself. I'm going to push myself forward. I'm going to start develop better habits that can eventually lead to reemployment, hopefully. For me, burnout is very tied to my experience as a teacher, of course, because really I left teaching because of burnout. And it's a lot of different factors that played into it. I think one of the earliest ones was when I realized that I did have this habit of overreacting to kids who were misbehaving, raising my voice, getting really frustrated with kids and taking it very personally when they were misbehaving. And that was probably mid-career for me when I realized that. And I didn't quit right away. But instead, what I did was I set my personal standard way higher. I said, I cannot do this. I cannot behave this way. I cannot react this way. And I set it so high that when I inevitably failed because of the giant stress of the job, and because some kids are coming to school with huge, outside stressors that make them blow up for no reason. It has nothing to do with the teacher, but it happens. And so when I would even a little bit raise my voice or get too strict with a kid or whatever, if I emotionally reacted at all, I would then be depressed because I failed at the ridiculously high standard that I had set for myself.
I see you too are a perfectionist.
The other reason I think I left teaching, or the other stressor that played into that, was losing my job repeatedly. I was at 5 different districts, I think, and 2 of those I lost my job through no fault of my own. 2 of them I left by choice. I had a better opportunity come up. But the 2 where I lost it through no fault of my own added to that stress, exactly like we were talking about. I don't know if I'm going to have a job next year. I'm looking for a job. I don't know what's going to happen. And that kind of stress really did accelerate my realization that maybe I wanted to do something else. As far as burnout as a developer, it's hard for me to really identify it, I think, because I haven't been developing that long. And especially as a team member, at a company, I did have all the stresses that you had when I was working for myself. 100%. I was making no money and burning through savings and family support and everything very quickly. So that definitely was stressful. But once I landed a job, I was ecstatic. I was over the moon happy that I could do this thing that I love doing all the time. I do see stress now. I mean, don't get me wrong. But I think that it's still the same thing for me as it was with teaching, which is, how do I interact with other people? How do I respond when somebody disagrees with me or doesn't like something that I did, or I get frustrated with somebody else's behavior, or, something they maybe just a choice that they made in the code or whatever. And I still find myself overreacting. Now, being a remote developer, you might not see that, because the great thing about being a remote developer is I 99% of the time have time to cool off, to take a break, to walk away before I respond to anything, right?
There's
Yes.
your avoid. And I 100% agree with that benefit, is that if something's going on, I can just minimize Slack and just not look at it. And
Right.
I don't have to, I can just focus in on my work. And the ability to cool off and avoid stuff that I'm being sensitive to that day, because it does vary day to day for me, it is a great way to avoid that source of stress, which can lead to a certain type of burnout.
Yeah. So maybe we should go ahead and segue into how we cope with burnout.
I gave you a slight coping with the one type of burnout, but there was another type of burnout that I experienced some years ago, and it had its own coping strategy. I was just starting really deep development of the second major version of my software. It was this very, very, very large rewrite, massive scope, complete ground up rewrite.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a point about a year into it, and I thought it was only going to take a year. And I was a year in and I was not done, not even close. And the way I started coding was kind of, I need to code the core bit, and I need to code this thing that hangs off that. Well, then what hangs off of that? Okay, then what uses this? And it kind of branched like an octopus, where I would have really deep components completely done, and then I would start to work on deep components in a completely separate direction, because it just happened to be whatever thing that was on my mind or that I wanted to work on.
Right.
And about a year into it, I was having a discussion with my business partner, and he was asking about why I chose to do something because I had given him a specification sheet. We were kind of back and forth, and we were disagreeing about something that probably was very trivial, but he started like asking questions about different parts of the architecture, some of which I hadn't worked on in 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
And then my brain just locked. It was like I was trying to hold so much disparate code in my head at the same time, and had been doing so for so long that I just couldn't do it. Like I literally couldn't remember the answers to any of his questions on any of the code base.
Mm.
And I kind of shut down, and then I was like, oh, I need to take a vacation.
Right.
And that's what I did. For 2 weeks, I just didn't look at a single bit of code. Here's like how I coped with it. I didn't look at anything. I didn't look at any blogs. I didn't look at any websites. I didn't look at any subreddits. I didn't touch anything code related. All my notes got tucked away. And I went and just played video games. My wife and I took like a couple of like mini little trips. I just did something. So I let my brain just reboot. And I tried not to do anything technical. I didn't play like Sudoku. I didn't do anything that really stressed any parts of my brain that I thought were even tangentially related to my ability to code. Right. And then after 2 weeks, I found myself eager to start coding again. And that is when I was like, I'm okay now. And then I got back into it and it was fine.
Right. I was saying that I didn't experience that kind of burnout too much, but I think I do get that, just the mental stress of programming and where you just can't do it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And the way I've seen it is when I was working for myself, I would probably do a 60 or 70 hour work week of coding because I was so excited by it. And when I started working for the company, I would do my 40 or 45 hour week and I would be wiped. I would open up my old website that I'm still trying to support, and I would just stare at it blankly, like, what was I doing with this? I don't remember. Do you have that where now you look back at your bot program and just have no desire to work on it because you're toast from the day job?
It's funny. That perfectly segues it again into the last type of burnout, the one that I more recently have had some issues with. Mm-hmm. And what it basically is kind of like a chafing that goes on. I have the unfortunate privilege of coding for myself as my primary experience. So I got very used to doing things my way. And that's just the way that I grew accustomed to. I mean, years of doing that, it's like any other habit. It's just something that I learned to do, and that's what I'm comfortable with.
Sure.
And so I find myself rubbing against the way that things work at work. And there's just enough of a difference that it chafes. And some days it's fine, and other days it's really, really bad. And it can vary on like people that I'm working with or particular projects that I'm working with, or even external things that have nothing to do with my work day. But if I wake up and I had like a nightmare the night before, or I'm just really tired for some reason, it can just kind of make it worse. And at some point, it becomes so grating that it's like looking at something that I disagree with, where I almost start to get this loathing, which is really weird to say, but it's like this distaste where there's maybe nothing wrong with the code. It's just, it's so foreign that I don't want to deal with it. I just like, really, disgust.
Yeah.
And so the cure for this is what I did yesterday. On my Saturday, my day off, I spent 7 hours consecutively with no breaks coding on my own personal project because that was soothing for me at the time, because that's exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to code. I didn't lose like the desire to be creative and program and develop. I just needed to do it in a way that I really enjoyed to kind of kick the engine back into gear. And now tomorrow at work, I'm recharged.
Sure. No, I think that's great that you can do that, that you can return to your personal project. You know, there's so many differences with our situation. I've been at the company longer. Your side project is much more successful and more developed. So there's a lot of differences in our situation there. I find for myself, I can't pick that back up. And maybe it's I burned out on the project, on my personal project, that never made any money, and that stressed me out. Maybe it's that I'm more happy about how things are going at work and the projects I get to work on at work, because I know I am getting to do more new development than you are currently.
Yes.
Which means I can put more of my own personal stamp on it and enjoy that more. So for me, at the end of the day, I'm having a real hard time doing more programming. The one exception I find is that anytime I can do file new, like start over. So I did a little Blazor project, a couple months back, and I've done several of those actually. I worked on music notation implementation in C# and Blazor, where it would actually, render the notation on screen. I never finished it. It's on GitHub as a half-done project if anyone wants to check it out. But that kind of thing where I can just like, all right, clean slate, let me just do some coding on something that interests me at the moment. So that I can still do. The other way I deal with the burnout is just like you were talking about your vacation, is just totally shut it off. So I will do a jigsaw puzzle, and it's still brain work, but it's completely different. Like I can actually listen to a podcast or listen to music or whatever and do a jigsaw puzzle, and there's no conflict there like there is for me trying to program, because it's just not that same mental task. I will exercise, like you mentioned. I will work on the house, something that is completely separate, where I can just turn off my programming brain and not worry about solving an algorithm.
You're a man after my own heart.
Yeah. So I think it's just that balance. We should go back for a minute and touch on how we both said that we will kind of avoid Slack or avoid that challenge of working with another person who we're frustrated with. I think that that's legit. I mean, I think that you have to do that. You have to give yourself the space to take a deep breath, to say, I'll get back to you, or I'm really busy right now. Force yourself to give yourself that space when you're frustrated, because if you respond right away, you're probably going to say something that you regret, or you're going to make matters worse. It's not going to be the best response.
I absolutely agree. We've talked about some of the challenges that remote developers face. And I think one of those is very much that, like understanding that you're not at a traditional office. You don't have to put up with your coworkers if they come over at your lunch break or, come to your cubicle and say, "Hey, how's it going?"
Mm-hmm.
Part of your ability to manage yourself, to get work done while somebody's not watching you, is also kind of learning how to manage your interactions with other people.
Right. And then there's the whole thing about how written word does not convey full context like spoken word and video conference. It's very easy to misinterpret something.
For as stupid as they are, I've been finding emoji as being ridiculously useful.
Yes.
And part of it is because I am the resident emoji guru, a title which I proudly display, where I have the ability to add new emoji at a whim. So I've added quite a few interesting ones. But sometimes if you use just an emoji as a reaction to something or as part of your sentence, you can very clearly get across your context to make sure that there's no ambiguity. And I find myself being drawn to that and kind of being like, yeah, maybe some people view me as being a bit silly or childish, but I also believe that my communication is far less ambiguous.
Yeah. And I think that it's really important to be as clear as we can about not only the words that we use, but also the sentiment behind them. Are we joking? Are we very serious? Are we concerned? That needs to come across. And just like you said, a grin for a tease, a grimace for a concern, these push across the underlying emotion much better than words can.
We were talking about avoiding burnout and managing your interactions with your coworkers. What we're talking about, even something as silly as the emoji, that's avoiding burnout. Finding ways of facilitating communication with your coworkers so that you have as minimal amount of stress as possible with those interactions.
Right. What if we want to avoid the burnout in the first place? How would we recommend that people do that? Or how would we teach ourselves to do that, since obviously we're both still experiencing the burnout?
Yeah. Well, coming from somebody who suffers his own share of anxieties and depressions and other issues, it's a matter of being kind to myself and giving myself permission to manage my burnout. It's one thing to know that something is better for us. Yeah, I really should exercise more. Yeah, I should eat better. Yeah, I should get to bed at a better hour. That's always a thing there, but it gets tiresome. But allowing myself to avoid burnout, being like, it's okay for you to take a 15-minute break and go and watch the birds at the bird feeder. Like if I was working at any other job, there's a lunch and 2 15-minute breaks, but I never take them. But why not? Why not allow myself to take that moment? So I have a tea break. I do at 9 o'clock in the morning because that works out because of my schedule, where I go downstairs, I make myself a glass of tea, and I bring it back upstairs. And that break is part of avoiding burnout. It's because I give myself those miniature breaks throughout the day where I can just step away from everything that's going on, because nobody needs me that much. Nobody's going to be, you're fired because you didn't respond on Slack in 5 minutes.
Right.
And so it's that sort of allowance for me. I have to say it's okay that I take these breaks. And those breaks are usually that helps me avoid burnout, is just, okay, I'm going to go and spend 10 minutes away from the computer.
I think that's really good advice. Allow yourself to take the time and to do those things that will recharge and keep you from burning out. I have a hard time with it. I definitely am a workaholic, and I definitely am a perfectionist, and I want myself to not get in these bad situations, and I'm going to work harder to not get in those situations and push myself. So that's hard for me, but I don't disagree at all. I think another thing that is kind of my approach, it's not just to avoid burnout, but it's kind of my approach to working with other people in general, and I feel like it does help me avoid burnout, is honesty, is being as forthright as possible in all of my communications. So if I'm frustrated with you, my intent is to communicate that in a clear way that's not angry, but after I've had my chance to breathe and to take a break, then let's talk through this. Let me let you know why I'm angry, because then we can move on as colleagues. And I'm not harboring a grudge about what happened. And that ability to move on and to continue to work with people in a positive way just gives me so much relief from my burnout. When I can laugh about something with someone that I previously was very frustrated with, I can be like, okay, you know what? Everything's fine. I know this person. I trust this person. We have our differences, but that's okay because people are different. So I feel like then I'm less likely to get frustrated in the future and burn out, because I don't have to worry about, because I've established that honesty. Then the next time, maybe it's a much easier, like, hey, you're stressing me out. Or, dude, I told you that I can't handle it when you talk to me this way, or whatever it is.
Yeah, I guess that's a very good lesson to learn, and I should definitely put that into practice.
Yeah, I definitely don't do it 100% either. There are certainly some people that I've been better at communicating with than others. But I really do think that honesty is the best policy in most situations. And honesty is more than just all of my words are true. Honesty is also a bit of vulnerability, kind of like you were saying, like with the emojis. It's that being very clear about who you are and what you're saying, and that you're not hiding something, some ulterior motive, or trying to manipulate someone, but just, this is what I need. This is what I'm experiencing. This is my suggestion, whatever it is, so that it's very clear. And that's, to me, is honesty. It's more than just, I'm not lying. It's that I'm being transparent.
I do like that. That is excellent advice.
My hotspot today is about podcasts, and we've mentioned them in the past, and this is a podcast, so you probably know what they are if you're listening to these words. But I've been listening to podcasts for many years, and really, as soon as I started getting interested in being a developer, I started listening to podcasts while I was still teaching full-time, while I was just teaching myself how to be a developer. I started listening to podcasts, and the very first one that I got hooked on is still one of my favorites. It's Coding Blocks. Codingblocks.net is their website, and I'll have a link on our website to it. It's three gentlemen. They live in the south of the United States, like Georgia and Florida, I think. They were all .NET developers at one point, although they certainly do full stack work, and they've done some other JavaScript frameworks and front end things, and other SQL work and back end things. So they're pretty broad scoped, but with a lot of connections that I think people like us can really get excited about. They've done some really good in-depth episodes on books. And so they'll take a book, like I've mentioned the Clean Code books, and they did multiple episodes. Like they'll do an episode on one chapter of a book, and the three of them will read it and then talk about it. And I really liked that, because then they had a lot of material to dive into and say, I get this, or I don't get this. I agree with this. I don't agree with this. And so it really gave some context to those books that then when I went to read them, I could be like, oh yeah, that's what they were talking about. And now I understand it in some context, and I understand how it makes sense to somebody else. They don't do a lot of interviews on their show, but they've done a lot of book reviews. They have a lot of fun little portions of the show every week Like they have a survey that they send out to their listeners, and the listeners respond. And it's usually something funny like Mac or PC, but they would word it like one of the questions, you're an idiot if you select that one. It's kind of like our Slack surveys that we do for fun.
Oh.
And they'll do different suggestions like our hotspots. They will do news updates of things that are going on. And yeah, it's just like 3 friends that I have. Oh, and the other thing, they have a Slack channel where developers can just go on that were listening to the podcast and suddenly find a bunch of other developers that have something in common. I found that after I found their podcast, and before I had a full-time job, I was quite involved in that because it gave me, like our work does, it gave me somebody to talk to. It gave me somebody to interact with and ask questions and just learn from. So that's my hotspot, codingblocks.net podcast. There's a lot of others that I could recommend as well, but I'm going to start with that one.
All right, so kind of vaguely tech related, I suppose. Go out for a drive sometime. Talking about ways to avoid burnout. Something that we don't really do very often is just take a drive for fun. Just pick a direction and drive for 20 minutes along random county roads. With modern GPS and cell phones, you're not going to get lost. You don't have to worry about it. But getting out in nature, you can like roll your windows down and you can feel like everything is normal and everything is fine. And you can listen to music or podcasts or bring somebody with you and chat in the car or just sing out loud to the radio. But it's a nice way to get away from everything and to explore the area around you, because every part of everywhere is really beautiful. And we don't really take that much time just to go wandering out into the wilderness. And it just popped into my head as something that I've been trying to do more lately, and I would recommend it very highly.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I loved going out. I shouldn't say loved past tense, but when I was a kid, we had like a ravine behind or across the street from our house that we would go down and explore. And of course, it was all, we lived in a small city, but the ravine was not developed because it was too hilly and crumbly and all that. Mm. But we would go down there and have so many adventures that you're creating these fantasy worlds for yourself. And then as an adult, I was a runner for many years and I loved going out and running, or nowadays it's more often walking, but just checking out the trails, checking out the trees, the birds, run across deer or ducks or whatever.
I will confirm the walking every single day after I'm done eating lunch. Unless it's raining, my wife and I go take a walk around our neighborhood just to get out of the house for a little bit. We've done it for years, and it's another wonderful thing that you can do. Go and listen to something if you're by yourself, or bring somebody to chat with.
Yeah, I think it's so important for us having a stationary job that we just get out and do the exercise. And it's both the physical exercise and the mental break of the different environment at the same time. Mm-hmm. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you'd like to hear more, please follow us on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, or now Spotify, and maybe soon YouTube. And you can find all those links at tocode.software. And please leave us a comment on the website or on your favorite podcaster. And you can also contact me on Twitter at Tim Purdom. And Tim J does not have any Twitter.
Down with social media. Anarchy.
So let me know if you have a message for Tim. Have a great week.
Take care of yourselves.
Yeah, take care of yourselves. Definitely. We'll talk to you later.